Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. We have Susan Pryor, who's going to be talking with us today. Susan is the Head of Information Management at Health NZ, and she's been with the agency since starting with Capital and Coast DHB in December 2022. She has an extensive information management background in information and records, library services, and IT service delivery, which was built during her time at MB and as a software vendor. And we welcome Susan here today. Thank you, Susan, and who's here to talk about the Health NZ information and management and records journey. So I'll hand it over to you now, Susan. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome on a Friday afternoon of a long weekend. So thanks for making some time to come and hear me talk about what we've been up to at Health New Zealand Te Whatu Ora. Just bear with me for a sec while I share my screen so you can see some pre-prepared notes and things that I've got. So hopefully, if I'm going to talk to what you're hopefully seeing on screen at the moment. Alison, can you give me a thumbs up that that's working? Not working? Just...
here we go. Yeah.
There we go. Awesome. So welcome, as I said. Thank you for the introduction, Alison. So just to put it in a bit of context, for those of you who don't know me, I've been around the information management profession for quite a while. We won't go into how long. And I sort of joined Capital Coast and Hutt Valley, DHB, as it was then, in 2022, and kind of started certainly my journey with Te Whatu Ora. That was in the year that Te Whatu Ora was formed under the legislation. So what I'm going to do today is talk through what has been our Health New Zealand journey to date. I know the word journey is used quite extensively. I'm using the word here because, as you'll see as we go through this kind of presentation, that the journey has actually really only just begun. So while we've actually achieved an awful lot of things, and we're going to talk a bit about that today, the reality is we're really only in the very, very beginning stages of our journey, because it is quite a big job. All right, so I'm just going to launch into what I'm going to be talking about today. So look, like many functions that were part of what was formed when Health New Zealand was formed, information management started on a bit of a journey towards what we like to call nationally consistent enterprise-wide practice and services. Kind of a bit of a mouthful, but basically it's really driving consistency of practice across the new organisation. And I'm going to talk in this session about our plans, the course corrections that we had to do along the way, which were many, some of the challenges that were thrown our way, and a little bit of a view of some of the successes that we've had and what it is that we've been able to build. So I will be talking about our establishment, the environment that we inherited, the early foundations and early planning, some of which some of the people who are involved in that are probably on the call today. I think I saw a few familiar names pop up, so welcome. We will talk about our progress and course corrections. You'll hear about that quite a lot through this process. And what progress that we've actually made along the way. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. So yeah, we'll allow time for that as well. So, all righty. So, story of our past. So on the 1st of July 2022, Te Whatu Ora and Te Aka Whai Ora were created. It was created out of 28 entities. I'm just going to run over some of this because it may not be familiar to everybody, but it was created out of 28 entities that became one, plus Te Aka Whai Ora, which was also administered by Health New Zealand at the time. There were 21 former district health boards, some functions from the Ministry of Health, the Health Promotion Agency, and then a number of different shared services agencies that were providing, if you like, shared services to some of the different clusters of DHBs. So if you think, whatever your experiences of the health sector might be, if you think about sort of where that's come from, for very many of these locations, the districts that became regions, information management, information and records management hasn't been a well-resourced function. So the baseline that we were coming from was very, very low. So we were in the business of, well, where do we start? At the time, I was at Capital and Coast, and there was a small group of people starting to think about what it was going to look like. So we're going to talk about all of that. So when we were formed, I'm just going to talk about sort of kind of three areas, really: the people, the practices, and the technology. So there were a minimum of 90,000 FTE. In the system, and at some reckoning up to 220,000 people that Health New Zealand, Te Whatu Ora collaborate with across the broader health sector. So people who are somewhere in the system that need to collaborate with each other, the numbers are huge. Nothing that many of us have really experienced before. Of that, a minimum of 80% of those are based in clinical roles. So clinical delivery, clinical priorities kind of take precedence over everything, and that in itself has its own challenges. We were also receiving, in terms of the people, 3,500 people from the Ministry of Health. In terms of our information and records management practices across the board, lots of pockets of people doing some amazing things, and lots of good work. I can see some of you on the call today, but no consistency really across the country, and that's mainly because we've come from so many different varying backgrounds, different levels of management, different authorising environments, and probably years of a very low baseline in some places. Huge degree of change fatigue even then, and that's still with us today, as you'll kind of understand as we go through this process, and a very strong local focus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but at the time everybody was very much in the business of what are they doing locally? What is this thing that's been created? How are we going to do that nationally? So that's kind of where the people were at. Practices were wildly inconsistent. As I said, some really good work going on, but lots of inconsistent practices, millions and millions of paper documents, collaboration very broad, but also very difficult, limited bandwidth for people to really engage in how we want to improve or change or consolidate or make practices consistent. And a lot of that's because of the demands of the day and pressures to deliver. And the technology was and still is, a big challenge. There was a minimum of 20 Microsoft tenancies in the broader environment. Shared drives dominated and still do. Many different content management systems, including what we were inheriting from the Ministry of Health, which was all in Lotus Notes. Can probably hear some sighs around that across the group. Sizable technical debt. So lots of bespoke systems, lots of outdated systems, a lot of system duplication, and an extreme inability to collaborate across the different parts of the country. So highly, highly challenging environment. We also had multiple policies in place for information and records management. So the key takeaway for us at the time was there really wasn't huge foundations upon which to keep building. So our information and records environment, this is just one representation of what that looks like. It's just to give you a bit of a sense of what we have been and are dealing with. So lots of shared drives, lots of multiple SharePoints. So there were SharePoint installations in lots of different parts of the country. Some of them on-prem, some of them online. Other content management systems, including things like Objective and iManage, and a few others that are well out of date now. Huge amounts of paper, thousands of clinical systems that also have records in them, and then every other variation that you can kind of think of in any organisation. We have this kind of fairly maybe it's unique. We have this kind of environment where we've got sort of three key sets of records, if you like, sort of vying for people's attention and management. Obviously, corporate and enabling records, clinical records, and then what we call controlled documents. Controlled documents, for those that don't know, are key records, key documents used by our organisation, primarily in the clinical space, that are extremely important. They are major policies and guides that control things like protocols that get used in the hospitals. So it's an incredibly important thing to make sure that they're accurate, that people are using a single source of truth. And the management of those actually gets managed through clinical governance channels. So quite a lot of players, if you like, in the environment. Lots of constraints and challenges to manage. I think the biggest one, and you'll see this when we go through the next few slides, is that our authorising environment and governance has been really challenging. It's no secret that there's been lots of changes in terms of the governance and management of Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand, right through to last year with the appointment of the commissioner. And that's obviously changed directions a number of times for us. Clinical priorities always take priority, if that makes sense. And that can be quite a challenge when you're wanting to implement something that sits right across the corporate and clinical space. And that makes a lot of sense, but it does make it difficult to progress things. Quite hard to get national visibility of requirements and practices. Always the challenge of dollars. Is there enough money? Have we got enough money to do this? Who's approving it? Where's the money coming from? And we'll talk about this a bit more, but a heavily technology-led program of change, just by virtue of where we were at. I'm hoping that you can see that. This is a diagram of kind of what progress. Oh, actually, I might have missed one. Hold on a minute. Let me just go back. I might have got a bit carried away. So we started by laying some foundations, and some of this work was actually done before I kind of joined the organisation. And so we had external expertise from external consultants who did some good work to mobilise the IEM community across the broader organisation. A lot of work went down through that period on machinery of government practices, Section 23 transfers, trying to get all the information together to be able to do that, quite a challenge, and some current state analysis work. Very quickly in that process, it became clear that we were going to need some form of system to put digital records for the people who were transferring in from the Ministry of Health. And so early focus, sort of 2023, was really around an interim ECMS for exactly that purpose. And then obviously we were identifying key partners that we would work with, and identifying vendor partners as well as our key partners in the organisation. Yeah, so just going to move on to the next slide. So the nuts and bolts are really what I want to talk to you about today, is the journey that you can probably see on the screen at the moment. So that is a bit of a summary of our progress and the course corrections that we had to make along our journey. You will see some lighter coloured circles in the middle. Those represent some pretty major course corrections that we had to make as we were going through the process. So in essence, we started in 2022-23 planning towards an interim ECMS, and early work was around some initial taxonomy, very, very, very small project team. And then we moved on into the demand for interagency collaboration. So while the interim ECMS was extremely important and needed to happen, the demand that was coming from literally the top of the organisation on how do we make it easy for people to collaborate and share documents across the organisation when everybody is sitting in different tenancies, that really switched up and changed everything. We were doing a lot of work with our, I'm going to call them data and digital partners. Actually, they're digital services now, but effectively our IT group. And they were the people with the money. And this is what I mean about it being a technology-led project. So they were the people with the money, with the project funding to get on with doing some of the consolidation work. It became pretty apparent to us quite quickly that we needed to partner up with them in order to actually get anything over the line. The big thing for us at that stage was a shift from driving towards an interim ECMS towards an all of Health New Zealand ECMS option. So this was approved at the highest levels in the organisation, and we moved from designing something that was going to be for 3,500 people merging in on an interim basis from the Ministry of Health to something that ultimately would be made available to everybody in the organisation. Part of that build was also partnering with an external vendor to manage migrations as well. So the very, very early plan in this part of the process was build out what we needed in a new SharePoint environment, migrate as much as we could from the legacy environments so that they were in one archive, apply retention and disposal and various lifecycle management rules into there. And that would be the core place where we would be doing our disposal work or our lifecycle management, add on a few third-party tools and go from there. Well, that changed. Again, you'll see another circle towards the end of this slide where I've referred to it as the Health New Zealand back to budget reset. So for those that follow the papers, you will have seen a commissioner was appointed in the middle of last year. There was a financial squeeze on the organisation, and many of the projects that had been set out to be achieved were pared back or reduced in size or just simply stopped altogether. We're still in that financial state, although it's now much clearer and we now know what we're doing about all that and where we're going. But it was quite a shift in terms of our process. So we went from building something interim to building something for everybody with backup migrations going into the new system so that people would be able to find and collaborate and all of those good things to okay, hold the phone, we need to think again and do this in a different way. We are now in a situation where the base builds have been done. We've done some amazing work with our partners and across the country, across the broader organisation, but most of our migration work has been paused. And we are now looking to do that in a different way and manage that stuff, that content at source. We're managing the new system in BAU, but we're managing it without a confirmed information management team in place. So when the commissioner came in last year, not only did a lot of projects get paused, but also a whole lot of change activity in terms of organisational change got paused as well. And we were part of that pause as well. So at the moment, the system information and records management across the broader organisation is being managed by a group of willing and able people in a moderately informal way, using some third-party tools that we haven't yet fully optimised. We're moving very quickly towards establishing that team. But around us, our data and digital partners, as again, you might have seen in the media, have been going through some huge changes. And there's a massive change going on there it's kind of changed all the partners that we're working with. So this is the course corrections, the changes, the constantly fluid environment that we're kind of working with. So what did we actually build? Well, we built a four-headed thing, that we call PICO. PICO means backpack, or we traditionally use for carrying people's treasures. We chose the name because we wanted people to come to understand that this was the place that the treasured or important documents that they work with every day, them and their colleagues, belonged in this system as a safe place to put them. It is composed of 4 key things. There is the core SharePoint and team site environment, for want of a better word, we'll call it live content. Controlled documents, which is a developing and soon to be growing part of our system. Pico Archive, which is where the vast majority of our content currently sits, and a SharePoint-based intranet environment. So over time, all of the intranets across the organisation will get consolidated into one system. A new one was built, fleshed out for the national intranet, and slowly local intranets are being added onto that, and their old ones being retired. So that's the kind of the Pico environment that we built. And these are the components basically that we've just talked about on the previous slide. So in essence, core SharePoint's in place. We have a devolved site ownership model. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. It's primarily at the moment used by our corporate teams, but it's slowly being used by clinical leaders across the country, particularly as we start to bring in controlled documents. Also, there is some backup work with our digital services team around migrating users. There are certainly some things that are easier to do if you're on the central tenancy. So there's a few challenges there with the clinical people, but that will come. We have an IM managed taxonomy in collaboration with the business. That's been a quite interesting challenge. We have the Pico archive. So everything that was put into our Pico archive is moved in read-only. So this is where we've put bulk legacy content. So we completed a migration for all of the northern region. That includes Counties Manako's content that came out of Objective. There was another set of content came out of the system that was used by the Health Promotion Agency, and then all of the other migrations are currently on pause. So there's now 35 million documents in our archive. It's not small. Everything in Te Whatu Ora is on scale. The structure in the Pico archive reflects the structure of the source material. So where the materials come out of a shared drive or a SharePoint system and it had its own structure, we've replicated that in the archive. Our taxonomy is really for the live environment. Not surprisingly, because of the pressure to collaborate across the country and provide the organisation with tools to collaborate, Microsoft Teams proliferated very early. So we've got a lot of people who have a preference for using Teams over the core system. We've tried to build it in a way that actually it's not going to matter once we assign our third-party tools to help us manage it. But we certainly are now dealing with a backlog, if you like, of trying to kind of gently influence people's behaviour to kind of use things the way we'd like them to. And we've got some third-party tools that we've put in place. We have got third-party tools for governance and provisioning of sites, for lifecycle management of our digital records, and for email integration. It's fair to say the user experience is still a work in progress. The work in progress because mainly because despite all of that good work, but also because of many of the projects that were paused or deferred or reduced in size, the content for some people is now split between their local team site, Central Pico, the Pico archive, or maybe even some local unmigrated sources. So because we didn't get to do all of the migrations, we've now got this quite varied. It's better than it was. It's much more consolidated than it was before, but it's not where we wanted it to be. So we've had to kind of switch up and do things slightly differently. Some people also have challenges moving between environments. They may still have a local DHB email account or account. And sometimes there can be some challenges moving between the core national tenancy and their local tenancy. That's in the mix as well, which makes life a bit interesting. The other thing is our clinical users obviously are very busy people. Clinical users are under a lot of pressure and they have a lot of competing priorities. And they've got limited bandwidth for learning new things. Things have to be as simple as possible, not because they can't deal with that, but because their time is so precious. So there's limited opportunities to engage with people of that nature when we're in the design and planning stage. So that's been quite interesting. And of course, lots of fatigue. I think that's a common theme, but yeah. So while we were going through this process, we did a lot of course corrections. You've probably heard me say that a few times now. So we had to make some tough decisions as we were going through the process. And the biggest one that's probably of interest is we made the decision, for lots of very good reasons, that ownership would be devolved to the business. So sites in SharePoint, the management and ownership of those sites is actually devolved to site owners. We possibly haven't invested enough time and effort in training those site owners to make sure that they're, well and truly able to do the task, but we are there at hand for people who get a bit stuck or need some help, and we will be doing some more training with people like this in the future. Also, the size of the team that we would have needed to support 90,000+ people, 90,000 plus people is kind of hard to imagine. So it just wasn't an option. Also, the business knows their business the best. So we focused on providing some tools, some guidance, some materials for them to manage these things for themselves. We're there as backup, but ultimately they know who needs to access their material, because realistically, the organisation is so huge, we couldn't possibly manage that for them. The archive migrations was the other big decision. We stopped the migrations, or the migrations were stopped, and we had to come up with a plan B. So now we've got content sprawled in multiple different places. Still not as bad as it was, but still there is quite a bit of sprawl into multiple places. Our plan now is to manage that at source using our third-party lifecycle management tool. And so most of the stuff that's in the archive will get managed that way, live content will get managed that way, and in due course we'll connect into some of these local sites to actually manage content as we move forward. Security and access, this is an interesting thing. This is just a challenge that we had along the way, and we had to kind of shift. Most of you will be familiar with the concept of open by default, closed by design. We initially started out with that kind of approach. We've sort of moved that to, it's really a language thing, but it's like secure where required, otherwise it's available to everybody. There's a lot of nervousness in the organisation about sensitive data. Totally understand that. And this kind of change in focus was what was needed to just get our clinicians on board with what needed to happen. Large parts of the system are still open to everybody, but there's perhaps more closed down places than we would normally expect. And on the functional taxonomy, I mean, we're all familiar with the benefits of why a functional taxonomy is the way to go. Selling that in the organisation has been a real challenge. I've talked a few times in the intro or through this about, what we care about the most. Ultimately, what we care about the most then and now is getting people using our system and adopting the system. So we have a lot of conversations with people about the benefits of a functional taxonomy, and we try to steer them in that direction, but it's not easy. But as far as I'm concerned and we're concerned, really, is the bottom line is what do we need to do to design it in a way that means that they will use it? If we can get them using it, then that's half of the battle. And then over time, we can use our tools to help manage it in different locations. Just about there, really. So a few other things that we've done through this period is an All of Health New Zealand information records management policy that is live and being used across the organisation. We've talked about the content that's been migrated. We also got involved in an awful lot of cost reduction initiatives. There was a lot of systems being decommissioned, reduction of intranet sites. We've been involved in a lot of those conversations. We've been developing plans to extend our controlled document solution that lives in Pico to every regional site across the country. So that's a big deal coming our way. We've done a lot of work identifying and managing some key risks around paper records. And obviously a lot of work's going on with reviews of DA 707, which is our functional disposal authority. So plenty of other things that are sort of non-technical to kind of keep us busy. Okay, so where are we now? Now what is kind of the question really? So the big focus for us at the moment is around getting our team in place. That's the IM team piece that you see up there, stabilizing the system. Certainly not saying it's unstable, but there's been a lot of change, a lot of moving parts, and we're trying to stabilize our support model so that we can use this and then move along to one of our other priorities, which is really about getting an uptake in Pico user adoption. And then obviously we'll be moving to managing records at source, embedding our third-party tools, and working on some business case for a paper records disposal. People often say, well, what have you learnt through that process? I even said to somebody I wasn't going to use the word pivot, but actually I'm using it now. What we learnt is that we needed to pivot again and again and again. The changes that came our way through change in government, change in governance, change of CE, all sorts of things that, you know, no secret, they're well known in the media, but all of those changes just meant constant rethinking of what are we building, what are the key things we want to deliver. You know, let's have another think. The other thing we learned is you've got to know your movers and shakers. Who are the people with the power, the money, and the authority to get on with doing something? While we wouldn't normally want to be purely in a technology-led project, the reality is that's where the pot of money was to be able to get this work done. And so we used that as an opportunity to move forward. And while it wasn't entirely a choice, but the reality is shifting from the focus on an interim ECMS to a full ECMS for everybody. That came very quickly and suddenly because the money became available through an approved business case. And it's like, you don't look those kind of gift horses in the mouth, to be honest. The other thing is around leveraging opportunities, something that's been really big for us, putting aside the ECMS and those opportunities, but we've been able to kind of build some good relationships across the organisation and work with relationships of people already in the information management environment in Health New Zealand and leveraging the work that they're doing to kind of understand what the needs are. Build those relationships and see, well, here's a group of people doing X, Y, and Z with, I don't know, a new system or a new build of something or even a new building. They often come to us for advice and we can use that as an opportunity to upskill them. And that's been really valuable. Strong partnerships are absolutely everything. Pretty much most of what we've achieved has been through good partnerships. And know your bottom line. My team hear me talk about this a lot, but it is true. The bottom line is whatever we're trying to do or not do, if it's going to stop people using the system, then it's not a goer. The most important thing is that we get people saving their records, looking after their information, putting things in sensible places, or at least in a system that we can have a fighting chance of pointing some third-party tools at in the future. And that's kind of where we are today. That was a bit of a whirlwind. We do have some time for questions. I'm not sure how much time we've got, Alison, but let me know. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, that's cool. Great. Oh, could I just ask Michelle Webb, could you please just mute your audio? Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Yes, we've got time for questions. So if anybody, I've got some questions in the chat and we could probably start with those if you like, and then we can move on to, if you've got one to the question, either put your don't know, put your hand up, sort of, or you can put your screen on and verbally ask the question. That would be great if you want to do that. So we'll start off with, got one question here from, hang on, let me just see if I can read these better. There we go.
I am looking at those. I
Okay.
can see one from Joe. Shall I just start at the top?
Yes. So from Joe, we've got, how do you encourage users to utilize sensitivity labels and metadata labels?
Training, training, training. And guess what? We don't have a team to do much training at the moment. So at the moment, all of our training and guidance material is in a single training and guidance kind of portal that people can access. We did start out with a plan around all new site owners having to go through a formal training exercise. I think I might be answering two questions at once here, but to go through a more formal training or a certification process that they've been through the training, they understand how things like sensitivity labels and so on work and the system in general, and they kind of sign up to being site owners on that basis. In the end, that was actually just way too restrictive, and so we've had to publish a lot of guidance material for them and make ourselves available for lots of questions. The reality is people are very nervous about sensitive data, understandable given the nature of the organisation. So they have a quite keen understanding of why sensitivity labels matter, but we have not enforced them. Right, what else have we got? What's next?
Okay, we've got from Natasha Barrett. Interested to know what third-party tool you are using for Teams provisioning, governance and lifecycle management, e.g. sprawl or duplication?
Well, it's debatable whether it manages sprawl, but at the moment we're using a tool called Orchestry for the management, the provisioning. So we have a system where various people can be given the appropriate guidance material and become site requesters in our system. Those site requesters use Orchestry for the requesting of new sites. There's a number of post-provisioning things that happen via script so that things get allocated and sorted and put into the right place. Quite hard to manage the duplication, but yeah. We are just at the beginning of our journey in terms of using reports within Orchestry to actually look for duplication problems, issues, things that need to be addressed. So when I talked a bit before about our third-party tools not yet being optimized or fully embedded, that's one of them. It's there, it's been used, it's in place, but we haven't got our full reporting functionality up and running yet.
And we've got one from Michelle Marsberg. What level of permission do you provide the site owners?
Site owners have quite a lot of permissions. The way the role works and the way it's been configured means that they've actually got the ability to do pretty much nearly as much as what the IM team can do. We issue them with an awful lot of guidance on what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't do. And as we've talked about the Orchestry tool and various other tools that we're putting in place, we will be putting our emphasis on what we can do to monitor, what reporting that we can do to see what things need to be addressed so that we can go back to those site owners and site requesters and say, actually, you need to fix this up or we need to do X, Y, and Z with it.
Oh, I just missed one here from Natasha Barrett. Does the functional taxonomy require staff to classify documents or is it automated?
Not yet. They're not required to classify. When we have embedded our lifecycle management tool, we chose Castle Point. When we have completed embedding and implementing that, it will happen automatically. We're trialing some bits and pieces around that at the moment, and so far it looks quite promising. Ultimately, once we're happy with how it works and we've tuned it, that will get rolled out right across the whole system.
Thank you. And Gunilla has a question, which is how do you manage your own and your team's fatigue and mental health through so much change? I
It's a challenge. Look, I don't even know how to answer that question. We're probably working in the most challenge. I mean, everybody's got challenges, and we know that IM is often poorly resourced, poorly funded, and under a lot of pressure. For myself, look, I try really hard to kind of check out at the end of the day, end of the week. It's not always that easy. I like that. Somebody said wine. Thanks, Joe. Actually, I would say gin, not wine. But anyway, primarily we keep focused on what can we do today? What can we do that's within our sphere of influence, and try really hard not to stress about the things that we can't influence. If we tried to influence absolutely everything, we would go absolutely crazy. The team have been amazing. I know some of them are on the call, and some of the broader team are on the call as well. They've worked really hard to understand their customer base. The customer base has got bigger and it has changed a lot. They've also had to switch directions so many times, it's kind of hard to believe, really. And at the moment, we're dealing with the changes that are happening to our IT support team. So sometimes it's hard to identify and find support for what we would call level 3 support. Team manages that all within their stride, but it is a challenge. Yeah. Thanks, Gunilla.
And we've got another one here from iOS. I imagine that IM cybersecurity and privacy teams would have been collaborating during this journey. Did you have any issues with the rollout with relation to security or privacy and issues and challenges?
We had many, absolutely many. I kind of alluded to it before when I was talking on one of those slides about privacy and sensitive data. Initially, we were driving a fairly classic information, open by default, closed by design kind of approach, but that just didn't resonate with our user groups. Partly the nature of sensitive information in Health New Zealand. Because it didn't resonate very, very well, it was quite difficult to push that as a concept. We had to spend a lot of time with our privacy team and our security team to get them to understand that. And actually, that's primarily what is behind a slight switch in language. So we don't talk about open by default, closed by design. We just simply say secure where it needs to be. And provide means for people to secure stuff appropriately. And there's probably more secure sites within our system than there are open sites at the moment. But equally, as we move forward, sometimes people are finding that's a bit restrictive, and that they're learning that they can actually trust their broader colleagues in the organisation more. They are great partners. Our cybersecurity and privacy team are really solid partners with IM, and we work super close with them. And that hasn't changed with the changes that are happening to our IT digital services team. And we continue to work really closely with them. So partnership is everything. Just getting around the table and talking it out makes all the difference.
Okay, and we've got another question here. Does the IM team use Purview? And if so, how useful is that for day-to-day governance?
The answer is yes, we do. We've got access to Purview and we are able to do stuff there. We don't find it as useful as perhaps we would like, and are looking towards our reporting functionality in Orchestry to plug some of those gaps.
Yeah. And I'm interested in how your team responded to user reluctance. You mentioned gently and making UX as simple as possible. What was, for want of a better word, the most impactful strategy you found to bring users on side and enthused about using Piako? Do you designate local IM champions, etc.?
Yes, and yes to all of that. The most useful strategy is probably really around working with the willing. It's probably happened almost by accident, but we make a point of working with people who have got a keen and obvious and immediate need that needs to be addressed, working with those people, improving the case. And this is kind of where we got to with controlled documents. So we started off the journey on controlled documents in Pico as okay, well, let's build this out with some people who've got a very immediate need to have a process for this and a place to put them, prove it in a national context, and then see if we can roll that out regionally. So it's like real life pilots. It's a little bit of agile. It's a little bit of testing as you go. We definitely will have local IM champions, but at the moment the focus is on pulling the IM team together. Part of the hope for that team and the proposal will be that there will be local IM champions and PICO champions, and I'm hoping we'll be able to support PICO community of practices and drop-in sessions for people who need help on a regular basis. But at the moment, the focus is on pulling the team together.
Okay, that's all the questions in the chat. Does anybody else would like to put a question in the chat, or has anybody got a question they'd like to ask? We have a few more minutes. No, I can't see them. Okay. Okay, okay, last chance to ask a question.
Awesome.
Okay, all right. Okay then, if that's it, then I'd like to thank Susan very much for your wonderful presentation. That was incredibly interesting, and yeah, that sounds like, my goodness, what a journey, and some serious challenges along the way, and it's not over yet.
No.
No, so thank you very much for coming along, and thanks to everyone who asked questions, and I will be back in touch with you to let you know about the next ARANS webinar. So thanks a lot, and if you do have any questions, you can just send them through to me, and I can forward them on to Susan. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, and great. Okay, thank you. Bye. Thank you, Susan.